Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're really focusing in unpacking a recent poll. It's from AtlasIntel Bloomberg.
Right. Looking at President Lula's approval ratings in Brazil and also some potential 2026 election scenarios.
Exactly. And our source material for this is actually a video analysis. It breaks down this specific poll.
Yeah, the poll itself was done, May 19th, 23rd. Surveyed quite a few people, over 4,000.
And a tight margin of error, too, just 1 point, which is pretty good.
It is. So our mission here is, well, pretty straightforward, isn't it? We're going to pull out the key numbers, the main insights from that analysis.
And try to understand the reasons they cited for why public opinion might be shifting.
And explore what this data, suggests for the political road ahead, but crucially, based only on the perspectives shared in that source video.
Yeah, that's important. Because, as you'd expect with political polling, this stuff can get politically charged. So we need to be really clear. We are just reporting on what's in the source video. We're laying out the ideas, the data points, the analysis from that material, neutrally.
No taking sides, no endorsing anything.
Nope. Our goal is just to give you, the listener, a clear picture of what was discussed in this specific analysis.
Think of us as guides through this particular piece of data and its interpretation in the source video.
Okay, let's dive right in, though. The big headline finding from this AtlasIntel Bloomberg poll, as discussed in the source video, is about President Lula's disapproval rating.
Right. It's reached a new high, according to their findings.
What was the number?
The analysis showed 53.7% of those polled disapprove of his performance.
Wow, okay. And how did that stack up against his approval in the same poll?
Well, his approval was at 45.5%. So, there's a noticeable gap there in these results.
But what really jumped out, at least in the way the source presented it, was how quickly this changed.
Exactly. The analysis really highlighted that disapproval went up by 3.6 percentage points in just 1 month.
Yeah, it was apparently 50.1% back in April. That's a pretty quick shift.
And hardly anyone undecided, right. Only 0.7% didn't know or didn't answer. Suggests opinions are fairly set for most people in this poll.
So a significant jump in disapproval in that short time frame. Which brings us to the obvious question. Why? What reasons did the analysis in the source video suggest for this dip?
Well, the general feeling among the commentators in the source was that poor government communication is playing a role. A definite factor.
Like they're struggling to get their message across.
Pretty much, yeah. Struggling to make it stick, maybe. But it also seemed like specific recent events were pointed to as the sort of main culprits.
Okay, what specific crises or scandals did the analysis mention?
They specifically brought up the INSS fraud scheme. That involved improper discounts on retiree benefits. Got a lot of bad press.
I remember seeing headlines about that.
Yeah, and an increase in the IOF tax was also cited as, damaging public perception. The analysis even touched briefly on other minor things, like a PICS case issue.
And that INSS scandal. The analysis linked that directly to the idea of corruption becoming a bigger concern again for Brazilians, right?
Yes, very strongly. That connection was really emphasized in the source. A political analyst quoted in the video suggested it's seriously hurting the government's image.
Making it harder to talk about anything good they might be doing.
Exactly. The analysis kind of painted a picture where these specific crises are just dominating the conversation, talked about in the street, on social media, and it just swamps any positive messaging.
The source also mentioned a view from inside the PT, Lula's party, didn't it?
Yeah.
About the IOF tax.
It did, yeah. A P2 leader was mentioned as viewing that IOF crisis as something needing a really quick fix to stop the bleeding, basically, to limit the negative fallout on public opinion.
So internal recognition of the problem, too.
Seems like it, according to the source. And the analysis also talked about this narrative battle over the INSS thing.
A battle over the story.
Kind of. Like, the opposition is focusing on the huge sums of money involved and how it peaked now under Lula, while the government side is trying to point the finger back, saying the scheme actually started under the previous administration.
Right, trying to shift the blame or at least share it. So, okay, a mix of specific negative events and this struggle over the narrative, according to this analysis. Let's pivot now. The same poll looked ahead to 2026.
Yeah, simulating potential presidential matchups. Gives us a hypothetical snapshot based on this May poll data.
And the head-to-head numbers that the source presented, well, they were pretty striking, weren't they, against potential right-wing candidates?
Let's break them down like the source analysis did. So Lula versus former President Jair Bolsonaro.
Okay.
In that simulation, the numbers were Bolsonaro 46.7%, Lula 43.9%.
So Bolsonaro ahead in that specific matchup in this poll. What about others? The analysis looked at Tarcísio de Freitas, right, the governor of São Paulo.
Yes, against Tarcísio, the poll showed Tarcísio leading with 48.9%. Lula was at 45.1%.
Another lead for the opponent. And then there was Michelle Bolsonaro, the former first lady. The source seemed to give that one particular attention.
It did. And in that scenario, she polled at 49.8%, while Lula was at 45.3%, the highest margin against Lula among the three tested.
Did the analysis mention any other candidates getting votes in those simulations?
Yeah, just briefly. In the Lula versus Bolsonaro scenario, it noted Ciro Gomes from the PDT got 3.8%, and Simone Tebet, MDB, got 2.1%. Small percentages, but noted.
Okay. So the really clear takeaway from the source looking at these simulations is that based on this specific poll from late May, Lula would lose. He'd trail against all three of these right-wing figures if the election were held then.
Right. And the numbers presented specifically seem to suggest Michelle Bolsonaro might be the strongest hypothetical opponent against Lula, at least according to this poll's findings reported in the source.
This sort of feeds into another point the analysis discussed about the broader political dynamic. They noted that the left, well, currently doesn't seem to have a strong alternative to Lula. He's still the main figure.
While the right, according to the analysis, has several potential options. Bolsonaro, Tarcísio, Michelle Bolsonaro.
Although the commentary also pointed out that having multiple options could maybe lead to some confusion or infighting on their side.
True, that was mentioned as a potential downside for them.
And this whole situation, the Lula trailing, the right having options, led the presenter in the analysis video to some pretty provocative speculation.
Ah, yes, that part. Linking the numbers to potential political strategy.
What was the speculation exactly?
Well, the presenter speculated that maybe, just maybe, the Workers' Party, the PT, might actually prefer if Jair Bolsonaro could run again, despite his current ineligibility.
Prefer him to run. Why would they think that, according to the analysis?
The reasoning offered in the source was basically that Bolsonaro is seen as an easier opponent to campaign against.
Easier than Michelle Bolsonaro or Tarcísio.
That was the perspective presented. The idea is that the arguments against Bolsonaro are kind of well-rehearsed, maybe pre-prepared even. Focusing on things like the COVID response, fake news, the Gabinete do Odio or hate cabinet, familiar territory.
Whereas campaigning against Michelle or Tarcísio, that would require fresh thinking, new lines of attack.
Exactly. New strategies would be needed. And the analysis framed this speculation by drawing a kind of parallel.
Parallel to what?
To the idea, presented by the source's presenter, that the right might have previously seen Lula as an easier opponent to face back then, and maybe even quietly rooted for his eligibility for similar strategic reasons.
Interesting. But it's crucial we stress again, this is presented in the source video as political speculation, analysis of potential strategy.
Absolutely. Not a statement of fact, not an endorsement of the idea, just reporting on the analysis and the speculation discussed in that specific material we're examining.
Right, so let's pull back a bit. What does all this mean for you, listening to this deep dive? Why should you care about these specific numbers and this particular analysis?
Well, these polls, even though they're just snapshots in time, right, they give you a real sense of the public mood, how people are reacting to the government right now.
And they show how specific things like that INSS scandal the analysis focused on, or the IOF tax hike, can actually have a measurable impact. They can shift approval ratings, according to the source.
Yeah, they contribute to these shifts in public feeling. And the election simulations, okay, they're hypothetical, but they do paint a picture of potential challenges ahead for the current government.
They frame the key matchups that political folks are already thinking about and debating based on this poll data anyway.
And that point about corruption coming back as a major concern, linked in the analysis to the INSS scandal, that's significant too, isn't it?
How so?
It shows how these older themes can suddenly become really relevant again, shape the whole political story, and maybe become central to the next election campaign.
So, looking at these dynamics as laid out in this analysis, it helps you understand the forces kind of swirling around in Brazilian politics right now.
Exactly. It's a complex picture.
Okay, so let's wrap up this deep dive into the AtlasIntel Bloomberg poll analysis from our source. We saw President Lula's disapproval hitting a new high in this poll. The analysis linked this to specific crises, INSS fraud, IOF tax.
Right, and those crises bringing the issue of corruption back into the spotlight as a key public concern, according to the source's interpretation.
And then we looked at the 2026 simulations from the poll. They showed Lula trailing key right-wing figures, Bolsonaro, Tarcísio de Freitas, and especially Michelle Bolsonaro, based on this May data.
And finally, we covered that political analysis and speculation from the source about the different candidate fields and that quite provocative idea about political strategists maybe preferring certain opponents over others for strategic reasons.
Yeah, that idea that maybe you want a specific opponent because they seem easier to beat.
It definitely leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about the whole game of politics. It prompts that question from the source material. How much is electoral strategy really about winning voters over with policy and ideas?
Versus how much is it just about maneuvering to face the opponent you think gives you the best shot, the one you see as weakest or easiest to define negatively?
Or maybe another angle also raised by this analysis. How lasting is the impact of something like the INSS scandal? Does it genuinely reshape how people will vote in the long run, or is it more of a short-term hit, something that fades by 2026?
Fascinating questions to mull over after digging into this particular analysis. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.